and welcome to this tutorial on how to make this adorable snap bracelet pincushion. Today I'll be showing you how to make this super handy pincushion, including making your own snap bracelet mechanism. To make this pincushion you will need 2 different types of fabric, some small jam jar lids, an old tape measure, a hot glue gun, fabric scissors and thread snips, some chalk, some thread and some scissors that are not fabric scissors to cut the tape measure, and some toy stuffing. You can also use a sewing machine to do this, or you can stitch it by hand. So I started by using my tape measure and my cutting scissors. And from this I cut a strip that's about 9 inches long. And I rounded off the edges. These are really sharp, and the bits that you cut off are also incredibly sharp, so do be careful when you're cutting this. Next, I took it to the workshop and rounded off the sharp edges with a metal file. The next thing I did was mount a metal rod onto a clamp on the workbench, where I wound the metal strip around it to force the curve into the snap bracelet that we need to make it snap. I repeated this multiple times until I had the desired curvature. After this, you need to drill 4 small holes into the jam jar lids. I'm using a piece of masking tape to stop the drill bit from slipping when I start to drill. I'm marking the holes out by eye, but you can measure them out if you want to. Mark them on with a pencil in a rough rectangular shape in the centre of the jam jar lid. So now we've prepared our jam jar lid and our piece of metal for the snap bracelet, and we're ready to start covering it with fabric and making it into our pincushion. I'm using a piece of fabric that I had left over from another sewing project, as you really don't need a lot to cover this bracelet. As you can see, I'm not even measuring this out. I'm just going to place the metal strip onto the fabric and roughly cut out the size that I need. You need to be able to fold over the piece of fabric to cover this bracelet comfortably and leave enough room to stitch around the edge on one side. In order to get a perfectly straight cut on this, I'm using a quilting square and a rotary cutter, but you can also just use scissors to cut this out. So now we have the piece of fabric in the size that we need, ready to cover our piece of metal for our snap bracelet. We also need a piece of fabric for the actual pincushion that sits on top of the jam jar lid. I'm choosing the smaller jam jar lid here to make a slightly smaller pincushion. I need to cut a circle which is about 1 inch larger than the entire circumference of the jam jar lid. To do this, I'm just going to lay out my fabric and then find something circular that's about the right size to draw around. Again, you can measure this out, but I'm being really lazy here. Now that we've cut out all of our fabric, we're ready to start sewing. We're going to place the metal strip on the folded fabric close to the folded edge and leave enough room on the other side to stitch around comfortably on the machine. Because I'm going to stitch this on the machine, I'm going to first draw around the metal strip with my chalk pencil to make sure that I have a clear line to follow when I'm sewing it. So now I've stitched the fabric. As you can see, I've sewn the curve onto one end, straight down the edge, but I've left one end open so that we can put the snap bracelet in and stitch it up by hand when we're finished. In order to turn the fabric the right way round, I'm using a chopstick to poke it through. Now that we've turned the fabric the right way through, we're ready to put the snap bracelet inside the fabric covering. This may be a little bit tricky now because the snap bracelet will try to curve in on itself. Now we can start stitching up the other curved end. Take some thread in a matching colour and a needle, and pinch the edges of the fabric together and start stitching around. You'll need to make sure you tuck in the ends of the fabric around the end of the snap bracelet to make sure that it follows the curve as you're sewing it. And once that's done, we have our finished snap bracelet. We still need to make the actual pincushion part of it, but for now, this is done. Now we're going to take a small piece of matching fabric, which measures about 3.5 inches by 1.5 inches. We're going to use this piece of fabric to sew onto the jam jar lid, to then attach it to the snap bracelet. This means that we're not having to stitch directly between the jam jar lid and the snap bracelet part itself. I've folded up the fabric to about 1/3 of its size, and now I'm just securing it in place with a whip stitch. Now we're going to stitch the jam jar lid onto the small piece of fabric. To do this, I'm treating it almost as if it was a button and stitching it onto the fabric through the holes. You won't be able to see this on the finished item, so rather than trying to make it super neat, I try to make it super secure. So now we're ready to sew the small piece of fabric onto the main snap bracelet piece itself. I'm going to fold over the raw edges of the fabric, place it on top of the snap bracelet and stitch it down neatly with a whip stitch. So this has all now been stitched on. It's not coming off. It's nice and secure. So now we need to make the actual pincushion part, so I'm going to take the small circle I cut out earlier, some matching thread and some stuffing. I'm going to secure my stitch at one end and then do a running stitch around the entire edge of the circle so that I can pull it into shape to make a little cup to then put the stuffing into. So now I'm going to try and stuff as much toy stuffing into the little cup as possible to make it nice and plump for our pincushion. Once you've done this, we just need to stitch up the little ball to make sure the stuffing doesn't come out. There's no particularly neat way to do this, so just keep stitching around the edge and pulling it tight until you've got a neat little ball. The final thing we need to do is glue the pincushion into the jam jar lid with the hot glue gun. Make sure you use plenty of glue when you do this and firmly press the pincushion into the jam jar lid and hold it until the glue has dried. So now we have our finished snap bracelet pincushion. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and try making this for yourself. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it.